SETI Talks has been a signature lecture series for the SETI Institute for many years, with hundreds of presentations and panel discussions on topics from black holes to exoplanets, SETI programs to non-human communications, NASA missions throughout the solar system, and astrobiology field expeditions across the globe. These talks draw an audience from around the world and live on in recorded videos on our YouTube channel, which we invite you to explore. We introduce our audience to scientists from nearly every domain of the natural sciences, from the SETI Institute and other academic and research institutes, both foreign and domestic. These talks give us the opportunity to share the amazing breadth and depth of the science involved in understanding the nature and prevalence of life and intelligence in the universe, and give you the opportunity to meet the extraordinary individuals behind this work. But for all these amazing stories of research and exploration, we rarely take the opportunity to talk about the SETI Institute itself and the research, education, and outreach programs we undertake every single day in support of our mission. So today, we're attempting to change that by giving you the opportunity to explore us. Today, we're borrowing a page from the Reddit Ask Me Anything playbook to give our audience a chance to ask us anything you like about our work and our organization. Our moderator and senior astronomer, Frank Marchese, will introduce you to three scientists from the Institute who will tackle your questions from planetary exploration to SETI to astrobiology and all points in between. The fact that before we even begin, we've already received nearly 200 questions suggests that we may be onto something here. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and SETI Institute friends the world over. Thanks for joining us for today's SETI Talk, Ask Us Anything. My name is Bill Diamond, the CEO of the SETI Institute. For our regular SETI Talks attendees and new guests alike, let me remind you that you can post questions using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to address as many as we can, interwoven with the many questions we received in advance. I also want to remind you that we'd love to know where you're joining us from, so please use the chat function to tell us where you are on or perhaps off our home planet. Our SETI Talks lecture series is a production of the SETI Institute in Mountain View, California, and it's made possible by the generous support of people like you. You can learn how to get involved in our mission, you can support our work, or sign up for our weekly newsletter we call Journey online at www.seti.org. We're grateful to our sponsors for SETI Talks. Their gift to us is a gift for all of you, and we're very grateful for their support. If you'd like to personally sponsor a SETI Talk or learn more about how to support our work, visit us at seti.org or contact us by email at info@seti.org. So before turning the podium over to Frank, let me also tell you briefly about our next SETI Talk on July 20th, which will be discussing the JWST, the new James Webb Space Telescope, that NASA mission, and the great anticipation of the scientific community for what new understandings it will enable. And with that, it's time to turn the proceedings over to Frank for our Ask Me Anything session on the SETI Institute. Frank, take it away.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. So we are going to answer to your questions, as Bill mentioned, and because we already received 200 of them, I'm going to give a short introduction to our speakers. So let me start in alphabetical order with Paul Dalba. Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hi, Frank.
So I'm good. So Paul is a researcher at the SETI Institute. He joined us quite recently in June, but he's also a 51 Pegasi B fellow of the Heising-Simons Foundation. He's known for leading the Giant Outer Transiting Exoplanet Mass Survey, which is a program that is running at Keck Observatory and Lick Observatory to estimate the mass of exoplanets. And you may talk about that a little bit as well. But he's also, and I know him for that personally because we do work together on this project, one of the astronomers leading the citizen science program at Unistellar SETI Institute. Nearby me, we have Chenoa Tremblay. Hello, Chenoa. How are you?
Hey, Eric, I'm doing really well. Thank you.
So, Chenoa, where you are calling us from?
I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Chenoa is a researcher. She joined the Institute also this year. She's a radio astronomer, so working on the new commensal open source multimode interferometric cluster, in short, COSMIC, for the Jansky Very Large Array. And this is a survey designed to complete an all-sky survey search for extraterrestrial intelligence, Technosignatures. So you are going to talk a bit about this, but you have been working as well on telescope in Australia and other radio telescopes. And finally, the third speaker is Agata Zupanska. Hello, Agata.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. So Agata, where are you located?
I am in Gainesville, Florida, at the University of Florida.
So that's why you have this sign about the manatee area in the back. You can see it's something which is very Floridian.
It's hot here.
It's hot? Aye. So
Right.
Agata is a plant space biologist with an extensive experience in spaceflight experiments. You work on project at the International Space Station or using parabolic flights, etc. You joined very recently as well the SETI Institute, but you also work at the University of Florida Space Plants Lab with various people such as Dr. Ferl and Dr. Paul. And you are really focusing on plants and the behavior of plants in microgravity and extreme cosmic environment. So we are going to talk about that as well. Okay, so as usual, I ask each of you to prepare kind of a small description of your research. As I mentioned, you joined the institute quite recently, and I would be grateful for people to hear about your work. So the first on my list was you, Chenoa. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm just going to share my screen. And you should see the first slide about cosmic. So the project I'm working on with the SETI Institute is called the Commensal Open Source Multimode Interferometric Cluster called COSMIC. And I'm going to pull that apart a little bit for you. So what this is, it's a computer system that's going to be on the back end of the Very Large Array, which is a telescope in New Mexico that has 27 25-meter dishes in this unique Y array shape. And the idea is to build this computer cluster in place so that we can take data from the telescope and process it in real time to look for extraterrestrial intelligent signals. So myself and another postdoc, Savin, are the two people that are actually on site plugging things in, rearranging things and getting things working. But we have a much larger team overall working on the project. And so far, this is what it looks like. So we have one main rack that holds all of the computer equipment that allows us to capture the signals from the telescope and process them. And then we've got a start of a computer cluster, which we're working on building out. So this is eventually going to have about 9 racks of computers with GPU processing that will allow us to do this real-time analysis. And the plan is for us to observe all the time the telescope is observing, but mainly in January of 2023, the telescope itself is going to be doing an all-sky survey. So every region that you can see in the yellow, the orange, or in the crossed section, we'll be able to observe. And the goal is to be able to look towards over 1 million stars in the next 2 years to look for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. So that's the project I am working on.
To observe 1 million stars and search for technosignatures. I'm going to have a ton of questions about that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Agata, do you want to tell us about your research as well related to SETI
Yes, of
Institute?
course. All right. Let me just get started. All right then. So what I am working on is we study plants in deep space environments. So what we are trying to learn is first, can plant that evolved here on planet Earth, can it even survive in deep space environments? How the biological systems that evolved here perform in those environments? Can plant physiologically adapt to those environments, which is different from Darwinian adaptation? Now, once we learn about all of that, we can actually take that knowledge and apply to improving plant tolerance of the deep space environment, so they can then be incorporated into spaceflight mission, human spaceflight mission, and mostly to search for life elsewhere. So the first focus of our research is a deep space environment of the cosmic ionizing radiation. That is a very damaging, radiation is very damaging to any biomolecules or life based on any biomolecules. So what we do is we take our plants and expose them to ion beams at the NASA Space Radiation Laboratory, the Brookhaven National Laboratory. And they have a very good system of simulating galactic cosmic rays and solar particle events radiation by just combination of ions of different energies. So the second focus of our research is studying planets exposed to microgravity or reduced gravity. That is mostly for the spaceflight, but also for eventually growing or finding plants on less massive bodies. So the way we approach that is we take our plants to flight platforms. The most attractive is the International Space Station that offers the prolonged microgravity. But there's also parabolic flight and suborbital flight that provide just the transient short-term gravity, can be still informative. So my current project actually involves moss. I can speak for hours why moss is a valuable little plant for space research, but let me just point two things. First of all, it's one of the first dry land colonizer. That is significant if we are looking at the evolutionary adaptive thing and how the plants conquer the dry land. The second thing is remarkably tolerant of extreme environments here on Earth. And there is plenty to learn from that too. So our current moss was collected in Antarctica because we are hoping that this moss is gonna be resistant to the UVB radiation that, thanks to ozone hole, is actually reaching Antarctica's surface. So we take our moss, we expose this first to simulated cosmic ionizing radiation, and then we send this to the ISS. And then we are looking at the molecular aspects of mossy gene expression to learn how the moss adapts, what is the physiology of the moss in those environments. With that, I hope I can just expand more in our question section. Thank you.
Thank you, Agata. Interesting, studying moss in Antarctica. So maybe we're gonna talk about moss and exoplanet in a few minutes.
Of course.
Paul, since we're talking about exoplanets, you're representing them right now. So tell us about your work.
Sure. I think that maybe the best way for me to summarize my work and the things I'm interested in is just with a brief story of the history of the discovery of exoplanets. After all, my work is to observe and discover new exoplanets. Frank mentioned that I am a research scientist at SETI, and I hold a postdoctoral fellowship called the 51 Pegasi B Fellowship. So what is 51 Pegasi B? 51 Pegasi B is a giant exoplanet. So it's a planet in a solar system that's outside of our own. And it was actually the first planet discovered around a pretty typical star. We call a main sequence star. Stars more or less like our sun. And that planet was a fundamental paradigm shift in what we know about planetary science. So for hundreds of years before now, back to the times of Copernicus and Galileo, all of planetary science, what we knew about planets and how they form and how they interact with each other, that was all based on a single data point, one data point, and that's our solar system. It's where we are right now. It's a phenomenal data point. It's close enough that we can watch it change and evolve, but it was just one data point. We hadn't actually found something else. But then comes 51 Pegasi B, and it kind of blows us away. Before 51 Pegasi B, we had this idea that, smaller planets like Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars are closer to their star. And then the giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, are all further out. And we had a very nice story of how all that worked and how all that came to be. 51 Pegasi B is like a Jupiter, except more massive, and it's much, much, much closer to its star than Mercury is to the sun. It's thousands of degrees, it's so close to its star. It completely shattered our theories of how planetary systems form. And that was the beginning of the revolution that is exoplanets. And that revolution started in 1995. Exoplanets are only essentially a millennial. They're that young compared to astronomy, which is maybe arguably one of the oldest sciences for all of humankind. So I particularly study giant planets like 51 Pegasi B and other giant planets that are a little bit further from their host stars, sort of bridging the gap between cold planets like Jupiter and hot planets like 51 Pegasi B, all with this idea of understanding all the different ways that giant planets can form and alter their systems. Just a fun fact, giant planets like to migrate, which means they move back and forth around their system closer and further from their star. You could imagine that that could have scary consequences for small planets like Earth, as you see a gigantic behemoth like Jupiter flying through your system. Everything I do is trying to understand the full picture of giant planet formation and planetary formation to try to put our own solar system in a galactic context. And that's where my interests overlap with the SETI Institute, and that's what I hope to achieve. So happy to be here to take your questions.
Thank you. Well, since you wanted to put exoplanet in the context of SETI, let's just start right away with the first question. So I went through all the questions, and of course, I selected a few of them and merged some of them. So I have one for Agata first, but I think, Paul, you should have a few details about it. So one question is it possible to detect plants life on exoplanet with our current technology? If so, what method we will use, and what kind of discovery you expect? So Agata, go ahead with the plants first.
Yes. So if you think about plants, what distinguishes plants from other life, what is very unique to plants, is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is this beautiful evolutionary invention when the plants are using the light from their mother star, which is in our case the sun. So plants in photosynthesis do use mostly visible light coming from the sun. Sun emits ultraviolet light, visible light, and the infrared light. So plants have the light harvesting pigment called chlorophyll, and this is the way that they absorb mostly the red and the blue light. They reflect the green, do not absorb much, that's why they appear green to our eyes. And they also do not absorb the infrared light. Infrared light just doesn't have enough energy to kick out electrons from the water. So there is this, it's called vegetation redshift. And this is this shift between absorption of the red from the visible light and not absorbing, just reflecting the infrared light by entire vegetation on our planet. So the first time when the Galileo probe looked back and saw this red vegetation edge, this just sharp jump in reflectance of the infrared light, that actually became one of those first solid, surface biosignature of our vegetation on our planet. So possibly we could look for something similar on exoplanets, assuming that there's going to be a photosynthesis going on in plants, which I believe that is actually, the chances for that are pretty high. Now, those plants may not necessarily use the kind of visible light that our plants do, because that depends how far that planet is going to be away from that star that is illuminating that planet. Maybe they are going to be actually adapted to using more of green red light, or maybe perhaps infrared light. So we don't know that. But just the selective absorption of some wavelength, which is the most effective way for a plant to conduct photosynthesis, and reflectance of other wavelengths is actually what can help us, identify that there is some vegetation going on. And of course, then when you look at the Earth, this covers a lot of our planet. Yes, so those are not like patches on desert or in Antarctica. Yes, that just applies to on a scale of an entire planet. So this is our best bet, I think. There's one more interesting actually approach, which so there is a group that was trying to find out in case there are trees, tall trees on exoplanets. Can we perhaps measure the shadow of those trees that they cast on the planet? And they came up with some, modeling that actually they can distinguish between the shadow that craters cast and that high vegetation, if there is gonna be one, cast. And Paul, going to you, it all has to be inferred from a single pixel. Yes, just a pixel. So, yeah, I mean, I think we actually, if we wanna just, search for some signatures, biosignatures, particularly surface ones. I think plants are the most promising because they are just so unique.
All right. Thank you, Agata. So what about the technique to find those? Maybe.
Well, we need the infrared telescopes. We need telescopes that can just measure the spectra. And of course, James Webb, telescope, which the whole talk is going to be dedicated to it. This is what gives us the best chances to find the vegetation red edge if something like that exists, of course.
I can step in and comment on that technique too and build upon that. The technique is referred to as direct imaging. So the idea is to look for this red edge, to search for this vegetation. We actually want to get light from this planet, beams of light from the planet itself. We don't want to discover it in any sort of indirect way. But this is challenging because these planets are very, very far away and they're very dim next to their stars. Imagine trying to see a firefly flying around a lighthouse that's located in Maine and you're standing in California. It's on the order of that difficult. Earth-like planets are on the order of billions or 10 billion times fainter than their stars that we're trying to see them through the glare of. So direct imaging technology is at this point trying just to push down to see closer and closer towards the stars that are very far away, and then to build up more and more contrast between the brightness of the star, excuse me, and the brightness of the planet. So right now, direct imaging from the ground and from space is pretty good at finding giant planets that are very far from their host stars. And oftentimes these are young giant planets. They're still very hot. They're actually glowing in the infrared. And that's a great start. And it's where we are now. And James Webb is going to push that envelope. The JWST is going to push that envelope. And then future large telescopes are going to keep pushing down closer and closer to their stars, then greater and greater contrasts until we can finally get that photon from a small planet like the Earth. And then we can start looking at their spectra and start looking for these signs of vegetation.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for reminding us the power of direct imaging of exoplanets. So with that transition, I have a question for Chenoa. With that transition, because we went from planet to exoplanets to now technosignatures in radio. I'm sorry, it's a very broad topic. So one of the questions we have is, how will we go about decrypting an extraterrestrial communication? What kind of experts, technology, etc., you will need to understand that what you detect with the VLA is truly a signal coming from intelligent technology?
So we can think of this in a couple of different ways. Everybody likes the idea to know whether or not we could do something like the aliens did in the movie Contact and watch TV from another planet or solar system, or can we just simply detect that a signal is unnatural or man-made in nature, so to speak. And if we look at some of the stuff we've done ourselves here on Earth, the Arecibo telescope in 1974, we tried to send a single message, and this was done by light modulation. So modulation is this change of light waves as a function of frequency, its phase, its intensity, and its polarization, or the direction in which the light waves are actually moving, and how these parameters change as a function of time. So I'm not a huge expert in this, but what I understand is that this can be figured out and decoded with software. And so the skills of engineering and computer programming and a bit of radio astronomy are really helpful in this type of endeavor. Or we can just be looking for a straight signal that is doing something that we know was not completely natural. However, this assumes that the signal itself would stay intact if it is a message of some kind as it leaves the alien planet and then reaches us. And it is likely that upon leaving in a planet's atmosphere and then traveling through space and then traveling through our own atmosphere, if there was an encoded message, it would become very distorted and very weak by the time it arrived to us. So the chances of learning more than it was an artificial signal is unlikely. And we can do this by looking for something that's extremely narrow or doesn't follow the standard ways that light waves naturally tend to occur. And then if we actually follow this question a little bit further, then we could discuss whether it would be ethical to try to decode a wave that we happen to be finding. And that's another area of SETI altogether.
Okay. So we're 100% sure that FRBs are not alien communications. We have a lot of discussion.
So FRBs are fast radio bursts. They're strong, intense signals that have some kind of modulation. They vary in frequency and they vary in time. And we are finding ones that are repeating, and have the ones that we've been able to locate down to very small amount, this direct imaging of them, so to speak. They've been located in other galaxies. And we are narrowing down to an astronomical phenomenon that could create these. And so they don't seem to be aliens trying to communicate, unless they're being able to use other astronomical sources in order to do so. And then we don't know how that would work either.
Okay. So I remind our viewers that they're going to be able to ask some questions by using the Q&A here, and we will take the time to take some of those questions. Paul, in the previous life, you were working mostly on solar system bodies, and then you got attracted by the exoplanet community, to my despair. So we have questions about solar system, because we don't have a representative of the solar system here. If you personally had to bet your house, that you don't have yet, but you may have in the future, that life could be found now on one of these three places, which one will you choose? Mars, Europa, or Enceladus, and why?
Ooh, this is a steep bet. So I think a key word in that question is now. Is life going to be found there right now? I think Mars is a hugely interesting planet, and I wouldn't be surprised if we found remnants of life there from the past, because Mars has likely undergone a huge evolution in its habitability and just the surface conditions of that planet. But right now, I'm not betting the house on Mars. So this takes us to Enceladus or Europa, both of which are really interesting cases. They're moons of giant planets in the outer solar system. Enceladus being the smaller of the two, it's a moon of Saturn, and Europa being larger, and it's one of the Galilean moons of Jupiter. Both of these planets are kind of squished by tidal forces from both of these moons, are squished from the tidal forces of their planet as they orbit around, and that generates heat in their center, which could possibly fuel some form of life on subsurface oceans here. If I'm choosing between the two of them, I may lean more towards Europa, given the additional energy it's getting with its orbit with Jupiter being closer. Europa's larger. There's more area for that energy to be deposited. Europa might be the winner as far as some sort of subsurface ocean life occurring. Although I will say at this point, we have no evidence for this. This is me putting a bet and maybe guessing for something in the future. I will mention, though, that very recently, all of the planetary scientists in the community came out with a survey of saying, what do we want to do over the next 10 years or so? It's called the Decadal Survey. They identified having a mission go to Enceladus to fly through these plumes that we know exist on Enceladus and land on the surface to study the material that is coming out of these plumes. It's an indirect way of essentially getting down into that subsurface ocean. So this is going to be a really great way to maybe make a little bit more of an informed bet in a couple of years if we can actually have this Enceladus lander and orbiter do this kind of mission. So talk to me in another decade or so, and maybe I'll change my bet.
And you will have a house.
Yeah, hopefully.
I know Paul, and we talk a lot about the fact that he's hunting for a house. So that's why I'm giving me this. I'm joking here with him. So now, a question which is not about science, but I kind of like asking those kind of questions for our viewers, especially the youngest part of the population here. What was the inspiration for you to become a SETI scientist? Do you have a book that you read, a movie that you watch, sci-fi, something that basically kind of tell you, oh, this is what I want to do? Agata, we start with you?
Yes. So actually, I don't read sci-fi books and I don't watch sci-fi movies. I mean, the most sci-fi I go is Harry Potter, which I really love, but So for me, it actually started, I am trained molecular biologist, but I also had always long-standing fascination with like space flight and space exploration. So then I realized that actually can combine the two. So I became this plant space biologist doing molecular work on those. And my vision for a very long time was this like, okay, I'm just gonna set up garden on Mars, Paul on Mars. That's just this like, we're gonna do this on Mars. So when you start thinking, it's like, okay, how we can possibly grow plants on Mars? You start looking into, well, what is needed for a plant to grow? What are the conditions on Mars that can impact their growth and performance? And then I started looking at our terrestrial life, which you look at the extreme environments, it's like, oh my God, plants actually can adapt to a very low pressure. Well, there is moss that grows in Himalaya, 6,000 meters high. There is not that much pressure there. Moss is just doing just fine. Well, if you expose this to UVB radiation that normally is harmful to all our animals, well, there's a lot of lichens, mosses, they can totally take that. So you push and push those limits of the terrestrial life. It's like, okay, maybe actually we can even find a plant that can do just fine right now without much of genetic manipulation. So this is when you start like asking all those natural questions, like, where is the limit? Can plants grow on the different celestial bodies? Or can we actually have like multicellular, life? So what's remarkable when you look at our life, it's very adaptable. It can sustain a lot, and plants in particular, because plants can't run. They have no other option, like animal can find a shelter, move somewhere. Those poor plants just are exposed to whatever environment tosses at them, and they do just fine. And then the early spaceflight stuff done on plants is like, wow, plants are gonna be totally confused in microgravity. They have no reference to the gravity vector. They're just gonna be tangled up. Leaves are not gonna be no longer leaves. Like, no, leaves are leaves, roots are roots. They perform the same function. Yes, plants do not grow like in a straight vertical line. They skew a little bit, or just they get tangled a little. But overall, they can produce seeds. They can just develop normally. And when you think of space crop plants, like they even produce edible tomatoes and zucchini and all of that wonderful stuff that our astronauts on the station enjoy so much. So this is how I got into SETI. It's like I am looking into limits of terrestrial life, and that gets you to this question like, is there any chance that similar life can actually be on other planets in other systems? So that is a quite, I took a detour to say the least, but all that eventually came together, and I just do my dream work. I am really in my element. I love this research. I love the science. So.
Genoa, what about you? Thank you, Agata.
I do love sci-fi. I don't watch it as much as I read it, but it's probably not what inspired me to get into SETI. So I got into SETI through chemistry. So I studied a chemistry bachelor's degree. And while I was working in the lab, my husband brought home a research paper while he was working on his physics degree that talked about doing chemistry of space. And this idea of being able to flip my problem on its head, that instead of taking techniques in the lab and looking for the unknown atoms and molecules, that I can actually look for what I would expect to find as an atom or molecule and tune my instrument. And so I went back in 2016 and got a PhD in astrophysics and worked on astrochemistry. And while I was doing that, one of my advisors went, well, did you know that you have a lot of parallels with SETI in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and that we can tune our telescopes and use the same data to search for extraterrestrial intelligence, as well as biosignatures or molecules of space that might indicate life. And so I got into it through that. And so I was on commissioning teams on a couple of telescopes in Australia, played around with these data concepts there. And then in February, joined the SETI Institute to help build this new system on the VLA itself. and using some of that expertise, and then learning a lot more from the perspective of the SETI community and how else we can use our telescopes and our instruments to search for life.
Thank you. Paul, you ready? Short.
Yeah. So I got hooked into astronomy as a kid when I had a small telescope and I was able to see Jupiter through it. That was sort of the end of the story for me. But as how I came around to SETI, to kind of come back to what I mentioned in my introduction, was that at first humankind just had one data point. It was the solar system. By the time I got to the point where I was doing a PhD in astrophysics, we had thousands of data points, thousands of them, and we are just beginning. So one of the kind of missions of SETI is to understand the origin and nature of life in the universe. And for someone with the planetary science and astrophysics background, I come at that very physical minded of how did the planets get to where they are? And so that was my entrance into SETI, the fact that now there are thousands of exoplanetary systems, thousands of data points to play around with. And that's a natural overlap with SETI.
All right, thank you. So I have a question that I know is a bit it's not controversial, but it's a question we always hear. And I really want Chenoa and Agata to take the time to discuss about this. A lot of people have been kind of emphasizing the fact that we are looking for life which is similar to our. We have a very anthropocentric view of the search at the SETI Institute. What do you think about this assessment, Chenoa? And maybe Agata could give us some ideas about the type of life we could find on other planets.
I think in general, we use it as a starting point because it's the only life that we know of. And if we open it up to anything and everything, the question becomes quite large and quite difficult to actually answer, right? And so we often use a model of our own life to try to narrow down the field a bit. But that doesn't mean that every way that we're searching is exactly just a model of our own. We are developing agnostic approaches to, say, the study looking for chemistry in various places. So there's this peculiar nature of some molecules called chiral, which means that there can be two formations of the same molecule, but the atoms are slightly arranged. So they match kind of like our own hands, but they're not identical. They're kind of mirror images of each other. In life on Earth, in life anywhere that we have founded on Earth, has a preference for one of those chiralities versus the other. And we don't know exactly the origins or reasons for this. And there are a number of people studying it, including people within the SETI community. But one way to just be completely agnostic and not have to worry about what is the specific molecules or chemistry, is it carbon-based, is it silica-based, is it whatever, is looking for this chirality. So that's one way that we can approach it. But I think Agata could really add to another interesting way of thinking about this problem.
Speaking of chirality too, so our enzymes are actually processing reactions taking just one time, D or L. That's just it. So I think the biological system, if that weren't based on our biomolecules, would look very different. So we have the DNA, then RNA, and the proteins. This is all very much orchestrated. One of the greatest, inventions of the evolution of life is actually making this jump from DNA to protein, and this is called genetic code. How the amino acid in a protein is actually coded by the DNA. So all of those, if that were a completely different chemistry, would look likely very different. So what we could look for, well, we think that sort of genetic information and the information that is being passed on from parent to offspring would require a molecule that has some repetition, some repetitive units that can get like replicated and passed on to the offsprings. So whatever we are going to be looking for, there is just some features, I think, that we could think as the direction. But it would be very tricky. It's again, like Chenoa said, like everything we really know, biomolecules, the biological stuff is just That's what we know, and that's what we are trying to find, in hopes that that is actually the textbook for life now.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that for the viewers here is that when we're gonna find life is gonna be such an extraordinary a finding that is not gonna be accepted by the entire community. There will be a huge debate. You will hear about it for 5, 10, 20 years until finally we kind of converge that the signatures is truly the signature of life. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when we found the first exoplanet by radial velocity in 1995 that Paul mentioned. And for 4 years, basically, a lot of people wrote paper claiming that this was not an exoplanet. So imagine that if we're gonna find, when we're gonna find the signature of life on exoplanets or on Mars or anything, that will be a lot of the conversation and discussion involving biologists, chemists, astronomers, and so on. So it's going to be a complicated discussion, but we're ready for that.
I think we're also ready to accept that the conversation is going to involve non-scientists as well, psychologists, sociologists, and implications of what a detection could mean.
Talking about non-astronomers and non-scientists, we have a question that I want you, Genova, to take the time to answer with Paul. We don't have to be an astronomer to find life. You don't have to be an astronomer or a biologist to help SETI. Some people have very good knowledge in coding, for instance. Is there a way for them to be involved in your research? And Genova, you show during your presentation a rack with computers. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so the computer system I'm working on is too new and hasn't collected much of data. But between Breakthrough Listen, which focuses on collecting data with radio telescopes, and a number of other projects, a lot of the data are actually openly and freely available, as well as making the software itself available. So I'm going to try to share my screen for a second and show you how you could get involved. So this is the Breakthrough Listen Open Data Archive. So this is a collection of data from the Parkes Radio Telescope in Australia, the 64-meter telescope, and the Green Bank Telescope, which is a 100-meter dish in here in the east coast of the US. And you can go and you can search parts of the sky, and you can download the data from this. And then we use a tool called TurboSETI to look for drifting signals. And this is signals that are going to show some kind of shift in frequency as a function of collecting time, because our planet is moving and the other planet is moving. And so we have these algorithms that go through and find these drifting signals. And TurboSETI is the main program that we've been currently using, although a new generation of programs are constantly being developed. And this has been tried and tested and readily available as well to be downloaded through a GitHub repository. And there are a number of tutorials using this TurboSETI software and other freely available software to be able to go through and learn how we actually are processing the data. So if you wanted to pull data from that archive, grab the software, you could start looking through and searching yourself as well.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to take the time to answer to this question as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. In the field of exoplanets, we're in this gold rush phase where we're just still trying to discover all the ones that are out there that we have the capability of seeing. And one of the missions that's active right now that I work with is called the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. It's a NASA and MIT mission that does that. It discovers exoplanets as they happen to cross in front of their stars from our point of view. And when the planet crosses in front of the star, it dims the light of the star just a little bit. This mission is producing more data than all of the astronomers can handle. There's more data than we can possibly look at. So there's a program called Planet Hunters TESS, and you can join this program through the Zooniverse platform, which if you just Google Zooniverse Planet Hunters TESS, you'll be directed straight to this program where you can actually inspect the light curves, which are measurements of the brightness of stars measured by TESS. You can inspect them and try to learn how to identify what's an exoplanet transit, what is some sort of false positive, or what's just, the spacecraft shaking around a little bit. And I work with teams of people who discover these planets, They'll shoot me an email, and that night I'll have it on a telescope and we'll be following it up. This is how the process works. And so that's the starting point. And if you have coding experience, you can then access the codes that the astronomers use as well. They're open source. Almost everything in exoplanets right now is open source. All of the test data is immediately available once it hits the ground. So there's no proprietary time for scientists. So if you want to discover exoplanets, you can. And so look up the test mission, look up Zooniverse tests.
Good, thank you. That's a very good reminder that yes, scientists are extremely transparent with their data. As soon as we observe, we post them. So for the people
I can also add to that. So with like modern biology techniques, we generate a lot of information and a lot of data. So whenever, let's say, our plant goes to spaceflight, we get the gene expression. We know about expression levels of every single gene that is in the genome of that organism. All that data is called omics, so you can have the transcriptomics, what the genes are expressed, or metabolomics, or proteomics. So this is just the massive data generated. So now we are entering this phase when there is the data mining, what all that data means. So NASA has this publicly available space where there is all the big data from every spaceflight experiment placed. That is called GeneLab. And anyone who really has any skills in bioinformatics and analyzing the large biological data sets can absolutely use that and hopefully gather much more information that, because there is that information. It's just finding this out and comparing and extracting really the essence. So, yeah, there is a lot of regarding the life sciences and spaceflight mostly. There is a lot of public data that also applies to the publications that are open source and available through NASA sources and links.
Thank you, Agata.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're entering in the part where I've received questions live almost, and thanks Rebecca and Simon for taking the time to select some of them. We have more than 10 of them, okay? So we're gonna play the game again, where I'm basically gonna say the question and assign it to one of you, and you're gonna try to give me the shortest answer as possible, okay? Is that okay? Good. All right, first question for all of you. So we're gonna start with you, Chenoa. What role does or could AI play in your research?
AI is a great way to search through all of our candidate signals and help us differentiate signals that are actually coming from Earth from those that might be potentially coming from space.
Thank you. What about you, Agata? Do you use AI?
No, we do not.
Okay, next, Paul.
Discovery of exoplanets in this massive amount of data that I just mentioned. That's where AI and machine learning is going to come into play.
But it's not the case yet.
We're just starting it in the last couple of years. We're just getting there.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. The question for you, Paul. How difficult is it to look for water on exoplanets?
How difficult is it to look for other exoplanets?
No, to look for water.
To look for water. So the main technique that ideally we want to be doing direct imaging that I mentioned before. Right now, we're looking at planets while they cross in front of their host stars, and we're looking at the light that goes through that planet's atmosphere before it gets to us. The technique is called transmission spectroscopy. And we've found water on a number of exoplanets, in the atmospheres, I should say, of a number of exoplanets, but they're not habitable exoplanets. They're generally gaseous exoplanets, not the kind of things where we think life would be. So we are capable of finding water, but to get down to habitable sized planets, it's very difficult, and it's still going to take, the JWST or perhaps even the next generation of space telescopes.
Thank you. Agata, will it be possible for photosynthesis to happen with other wavelengths of light?
With all the wavelengths of light?
Yes.
Well, if you have a little bit different light harvesting pigments, I believe that is technically possible. It's more about the energy of the wavelength, how much plant can absorb without being damaged, and how much it can take that energy and store it to then eventually power the chemical reaction. But if you tweak a little bit light harvesting pigments, I believe there is a chance to have it at the entire spectrum. Actually, our way of thinking about photosynthesis got a bit challenged because, like speaking of the vegetation red edge, there was no infrared absorbing chlorophylls, where lately there were cyanobacteria found that actually can absorb some of infrared light. So I think it's possible.
Good. Chenoa, have there been an evolution in which technosignatures are being searched for? How SETI has changed over the years?
The biggest way that I have seen it change is in the amount of the sky that we can view. So when the search for technosignatures first started in, say, the late 1960s, we were only looking towards 1 or 2 stars at a maximum and trying to analyze the data, and that could take 1 or 2 years sometimes. Now, in a single survey that I did in about 3 months, I looked in over 10 million stars. So our telescopes increasing our field of view and our data processing rates have greatly allowed us to look towards a lot more objects. And so we can say with a lot more certainty whether we're detecting a certain style of signal or not.
Good, thank you. Okay, so I have a question for Agata and Paul right now. So first, we've been congratulated for doing a webinar, which is interesting. So that's great for everybody. But they realized that they didn't hear you mention that one of the major products of photosynthesis is oxygen. Are there any plans to look for atmospheric oxygen as a sign of plant life? And that's for Agata and Paul.
Yes, so I think on top of the like vegetation red edge and the surface biosignature, you can also look at the biosignatures in the gas and in the atmosphere. So detection of the oxygen in the atmosphere of exoplanet would be indicative or helpful. Mostly if you find other biosignatures that could be related to plants. However, that is all assuming that the photosynthesis occurs in exact same way as it does on planet Earth. We go back to, well, how about if life is based on other molecules or other processes are happening in life on exoplanets? But yes, having oxygen is uniquely produced by photosynthetic organisms on our planet. So that would be a very, very strong argument.
Do you want to add something, Paul, about the detection of oxygen on exoplanets?
Yeah, for any detection that we attempt to make in the atmosphere of an exoplanet, if there is a process whereby that can be created abiotically without the need of life, that will always be a strong argument to have to overcome to then justify that, oh, this is life as opposed to something abiotic. So in addition to looking for oxygen, we'll be searching for signatures of things that are in disequilibrium. Whereas if you just had this planet existing without life, it would reach an equilibrium. And if we can find something that is actively being forced into disequilibrium, that would be very, very interesting. And there's a lot of chemistry that then plays into that.
Thank you. So now a question for you, Chenoa. About FRBs, we cannot have a conversation about radio astronomy without this, right? In how many galaxies have we detected FRBs, and what makes a signal of a FRB a candidate?
Oh, geez. It's definitely not my field of study. So I do not know how many galaxies that we have discovered them towards. It's a relatively new science that we've been able to target these fast radio bursts to a specific location. And there's only a couple of telescopes in the world that are capable of doing so. And so I don't have a good answer for that. Why it was originally thought to be a candidate for a technosignature, I think, was just with how bright it was and how narrow the signal was. And so that kind of hit a couple of the things that we think a technosignature would look like. But these days, we don't think that that's the case.
Thank you. So now a question which is not assigned to any of us, so each of you can jump on this. Will it be possible for life to emerge and develop without water?
I think water is incredibly important for life. It's just a lot of biological processes needs water. A lot of biomolecules needs water. I think this is one of those things that if we think that life may acquire different forms, well, there is highly likely that still water, a solvent, is gonna be required. But that is again from the perspective of a biologist. When you think about the biological system, water is just a must. And yeah, so not much is happening. When you even think about the toughest plants that are trying to survive the drought on deserts and they become desiccated, nothing is happening when they are desiccated. They just like freeze, no metabolic processes. Once they get water back, like this is the first and foremost important thing. Well, they need to have water, then eventually good temperature, then eventually light and all of this. Water is just the requisite of life. But again, maybe from the, if we had a chemist in our, joining our conversation, maybe they would have a different view on that.
Okay. So there's a question for me here, very short. Who is the astronaut in the frame picture behind you? That's Neil Armstrong, for those who do not recognize him, the first American astronaut who landed on the moon. Now, questions for probably Paul and maybe Agata. What is the signature of life on Earth? If you look at Earth from far away, I think that's the way I understand this question. What will be the most indicative of the presence of life?
Well, vegetation, red edge, and oxygen. Paul, what do you think?
I have nothing else to add. I defer to your judgment on that, and that is right.
I would
say it's radio communication.
I was about to say that. Thank you. Yes. And also maybe the Rayleigh scattering of the water and the presence of clouds, because then we know there is water for sure. That's yeah. From far away, Earth really looks like a different planet. I mean, all of this suggests that there is life on this interesting body in space. Okay, we're gonna take the last question. So Bill, you can start preparing you depart your speech. I have two more questions, in fact. One is for Agata, very technical, Agata. I'm sorry, if it's too technical, we can switch to another one. In terms of radiation resistant life, could a modification or genetic modification of the radiation resistant bacteria, such as Deinococcus radiodurans or fungi, that already exist, perhaps could improve the resistance of the plants to be able to travel in this space?
Yes, so of course we are looking into that, all of us. So when you think of protection from radiation, you can think about two things. It's the prevention of the damage caused by radiation to the biomolecules, most importantly to the DNA, because this is what really affects the survival of an organism. So preventing the damage from particularly like cosmic ionizing radiation that is highly ionizing, those are, ions accelerated to the relativistic speeds, bombarding every matter in their tracks. That's pretty hard to prevent. But there is a way, if you cannot prevent, then perhaps you can repair the damage caused by radiation. And this is what this fantastic bacteria that is ridiculously tolerant of radiation, like no matter how much you irradiate this, it just survives. So they happen to have a very effective mechanism of repairing the damage to the biomolecule caused by radiation, which is just breaking of the bonds. So if you break the bond of the DNA, then you just make the DNA like break the strands. So they have this system of putting the DNA strand back together, sealing this, and just moving on. So moss is actually, when you look at different organisms, there are some fungi, mosses, obviously microorganisms that actually do very well in the high ionizing radiation. And they happen to have those very efficient systems of repairing the damage that is done by the radiation. When there are free radicals that appear in the cell caused by the exposure to radiation, they also have certain enzymes that can just quench those free radicals, so there is no more oxidative damage to the cells. So we kind of know what could work against the radiation. But of course, the question is, well, if you have a plant on Mars that is bombarded relentlessly every day, every minute with the ions from the galactic cosmic rays, like, can they sustain that? Because it's different when you expose plant in the laboratory setting for 2 hours and it's like, okay, well, it fixed the damage. It's quite different to live in this environment.
Okay, thank you very much. So my last question, and that's the question I asked to the awardee of the Draco Award this year. So get ready. So we know that science and technology is basically developing quickly. It's in fact exponential in terms of discoveries and progress. So what do you think will be the next field of study? And try to avoid yours, which will be the most significant to provide an answer to the question that SETI is asking, whether or not we are alone. What is basically the field of research that we need to invest now to be able to answer this question quickly? Genoa, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So I think that one of the upcoming fields, I think, is around this AI and machine learning. And as we're learning better to effectively use this as a tool for filtering out these larger data sets that we seem to love to generate by our telescopes, but then don't have enough human resources and time of the day to actually filter through all of that data. So I think the upcoming field of AI and machine learning is going to be a huge boon for helping us find life.
Okay. What about you, Paul?
Perhaps I would say not just a single field, but the synergy of fields that have historically not really worked together. I'm talking pulling biology and astronomy together, ecological astrophysics, things where you have experts in each field, but they're not maybe aware of the limitations that their partnering fields actually have and how that might affect investigations that they could do together. So improving communication between fields that have previously sort of been stovepiped and not able to talk. It's very challenging to do. Even between astrophysics and planetary science, it's hard to do, and those are right next to each other. So synergies in the future is what's going to enable us to take the next big steps forward.
Thank you. And Agata?
Well, I'll say biology of extreme environments. We still have quite a few extreme environments here on Earth that they can really give us some ideas of, again, life adaptability. What is the range where life can function? What is the limitation? So I think I'll go with that. We also need geologists to overlay with that and get this, feedback between ecosystem and environment in which life survives or thrives. What is the impact on the ecosystem and climate and geology, and how life affects those two. So, yeah, it's still a long way, I think, with many people on board.
Thank you very much to the three of you. So we didn't answer to all the questions, but I think we give a kind of a good overview of all the research being done at the SETI Institute. Thanks again. Bill, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Frank. I mean, that was amazing. Okay, I'm biased. I am not an unbiased participant here, but I thought that was just wonderful. You all did a great job. But I have to ask a question of Chenoa before I dive into my closing remarks here, because if I'm not mistaken, your outfit, the outfit you're wearing, is not your typical sort of shirt, but it looks like it might be covered with galaxies and stars and other things. Am I right about that?
It is. It's a big nebula, a star nebula.
Look at that. How cool is that? Anyway, that's great. Well, I thought again that that was really wonderful. So thanks, Frank and Agata, Chenoa and Paul, for really an amazing discussion and sharing your insights into your work and the breadth of research at the SETI Institute. And thanks to all of you in our audience for all your amazing questions. They were really great. And this particular SETI Talks was itself an experiment in its own right. And from what I can observe, I think the experiment was successful. But that's really up for you to judge. So let us know what you thought. Let us know if you enjoyed today's program and if you'd like to see more sessions of this type. Obviously, we couldn't get to all of your questions, but as I've said before, unanswered questions are just opportunities for further investigation. So if you have a question we didn't have time to address, see what you can do to find the answer with your own research. And if it's really compelling, send it to us. Or, come and be a scientist at the SETI Institute. Once more, we reached a global audience today with guests from 20 different states and more than a dozen different countries. We were also joined by a founder of the African Space Institute based in Carthage in North Africa and the Los Angeles Astronomical Society. To welcome to both of you and thanks for joining us. Our friends in India were up past midnight to be with us today. So we really enjoyed having you here. And of course, people from Thailand and Europe who joined us were at all kinds of strange hours. So it's terrific. It's wonderful to see so much interest in our signature research, looking for signs of technology beyond Earth as a proxy for life and intelligence, but also the full spectrum of science we pursue at the Institute. Our global audience reminds us that it's curiosity that unites us all as human beings, regardless of our language, our gender, our race or ethnicity, or indeed regardless of our intelligence, being natural or artificial. We were joined from across the US today by people in California, North Carolina, Idaho, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, New Jersey, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Washington, Utah, Maryland, Hawaii, Minnesota, Ohio, Vermont, Mississippi, Wisconsin, Connecticut, and Texas. And across the globe, we were joined by folks from Canada, Italy, Chile, Germany, Thailand, Wales, Mexico, India, the UK, and Nigeria. How awesome is that? So if I didn't mention your location by state or country, that's because you may not have told us. So next time, don't be shy. And if you have curious and inquisitive friends in distant lands or states not mentioned, let them know about SETI Talks. And let's bring even more people together from across the world in the name of science and curiosity. Before closing today's discussion, just a reminder that SETI Talks is a production of the SETI Institute in Mountain View, California. We are a nonprofit research and education institution whose mission is to lead humanity's quest to understand the origins and prevalence of life and intelligence in the universe and to share this knowledge with the world. Our SETI Talks lecture series is supported in part by donations from the public, from friends of science like you. We bring these lectures and other events to you at no cost, but we're always grateful for any and all contributions that allow us to continue bringing the stories of extraordinary science and exploration to you. You can visit SETI.org for more information. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter we call Journey. Make a donation if you're so inclined, or just peruse our website, which is full of more stories of the science and outreach and education programs we undertake at the Institute. Thanks again to all of you for being with us today, and thanks for today's moderator, Frank, and to our guests, Paul, Agata, and Chenoa. I also want to thank Rebecca, Lee, Jasmine, and Simon at the Institute who are behind the scenes making the SETI Talk series possible. Don't forget to visit our YouTube channel and tour the amazing array of lectures and presentations and other videos. There are literally hundreds of SETI Talks, lectures, and panel discussions that you can find on our YouTube channel. Remember that the work we do at the SETI Institute is for all of humankind, so don't just stand by and watch. You can come and join us at SETI.org and get involved. The search for life beyond Earth is a journey of ultimate discovery, and we invite you to come along. So thanks again for being with us. Let us know if you'd like more opportunities to ask us anything. And good day to all of you. See you on July 20th for a talk about James Webb Space Telescope. Thanks again. Take care, everyone.